I'm sitting here today, May 29th, 2024, with my dear friend Rietje Keys, and my name is Mary Danoff, and we're just talking about her life and her childhood. And she is going to talk about her first memory of being aware of family.
True. And this, I am Rietje Keys. My full name is Maria Wilhelmina Keys. Holland was full of Wilhelminas because at the time I was born, there was a queen who was called Wilhelmina. And in any case, that's besides the case. But I have a big fat name, I think, Maria Wilhelmina. Who wants to grow up with that? But that's the way it is. Mary and I have talked about me writing my life, my experiences, and I would really love to write about it, but I have tried. I think I'm deep down not a writer. I am better in talking, and especially talking with Mary, who I love to pieces. And she came with a bottle of wine, and cheers to everyone. So it's good to talk, and I will try to make a cohesive thing about this, and that's not always easy. And I was thinking the other day, where do you start? And I thought, well, the start is when you start your awareness of life. I was born a girl after my mother had produced 7 boys. She told me that she had 2 girls first, that she prayed that she would have a boy, and she said that God never let go, and he gave her 7 boys. So all of a sudden I was born. I was barely 5 pounds, tiny, not a strong baby, although when I look at pictures later on, I have a big fat head, and so I was all right. I did not walk until I was 2 years old, which is not a good sign. If we had a psychologist here, he would pull a face and say, ooh, what about your brain? But our doctor said, well, no wonder, because that little girl is picked up by all the 7 boys all the time. Why walk? And so I was pretty hefty, and so it was probably also not very easy for me to get my balance. In any case, when I was 2, I started to walk, and I was part of the family on 2 legs. My first awareness of a family and noise and chaos came, I must have been like a good 2.5 years old, and I was put down for a nap. And I had a little bed that did not have, what are they called? You couldn't look through. The walls of the bed were solid, and so I couldn't look out of my bed. And I don't know if that ever bothered me or not, but it's, of course, if you have a baby and she is, not bothered by light and by people walking in and making shadows and light, it's probably was a very good bed for a baby. In any case, I was put down for a nap, and there was a football game going, and football in Holland, of course, is called soccer. And with 7 boys and my oldest sister, and my mother, they all loved soccer. So here was this big, big game in the afternoon, and they all watched. I apparently got very sick during my nap, and I threw up, and I just was in a panic, and I called and called, and nobody came. Nobody heard me because they were listening to the announcer, and I could hear the announcer's voice. And I still remember his name now. His name was Han Hollander, and he was a famous man in the soccer world. And he had a very beautiful voice. I heard him later when I could judge, who and what he was and or what he did. But he had a loud voice, and everybody was sitting there either shouting or saying boo. But it was really noisy, and I heard people go from the living room to the kitchen and getting tea things ready and voices, and I just cried and cried and called for help, and nobody came. And I must have fallen asleep because they found me in a bed that was unspeakably dirty, and they lifted me, and I woke up, and they took me downstairs, and they put me on the edge of a chair on a towel, and someone brought a bowl of warm water and put my feet in there. And to this day, I can still feel the warmth of that water on my feet. And I must have been in, pretty dirty, and everybody was concerned, but there was so much noise. And to me, very chaotic, all these boys talking and shouting, and this voice of the announcer. It was just horrible. And then my memory from there faded, and I don't know if they told me that I had a kidney infection and I was going to die, the doctor said. My dad was in Amsterdam looking after the clients he had there, and they called him and said, hop on the first train you can because she's going to die. So that was a horrible thing for him, because you can imagine that after 7 boys and you have a little blonde girl, that is really something really nice. And one of my brothers told me later, when we were grown up, I said, Tim, what did you think after, all your brothers were born? And he said, I loved it that you were a girl. He said, that was so cute and so sweet. And how nice is that? But my brothers were pretty rowdy and pretty precocious, and so my life in the family structure was, I think it was good. I knew I was loved, and I was picked up a lot, and I had cute clothes, and sometimes they dressed me up and they sent me to the neighbors to just say, look at me. And so I think that's really cute. But of course, as I became older and I got more of my own character was becoming more prominent, my brothers didn't think that I was so cute anymore. And I remember I had my first doll that I got on St. Nicholas Day, which is on the 5th or the 6th of December in Holland. That is the big day when you exchange presents, you write poems, and you poke fun at people's weaknesses. It's hilarious and good, but in any case, I got this beautiful baby doll that had big blue eyes that opened and closed, and she said "Mama," and her name was Bianca. I got a little carriage for her, and my brothers one day took the doll, slit the forehead open, made me look inside to see how the eye mechanism worked, how the hair was all knotted on the inside of the top of the head, which was so traumatic to me that from that day forward, I go in a panic to this day when I see a doll at a distance. Okay, not close, and I can, to this day, I will not pick up a doll if I don't have to. Later in my life, it became a little bit less traumatic because I had nieces, three nieces who had dolls, and I even repaired a doll, and I had a broken arm, and I repaired the arm, and I was really happy. But as these little nieces grew up, I was away from dolls again, and this trauma just was there. And I would look at my mother had fashion magazines, you know, big glossy magazines, and you would see a woman's skirt but no upper body. And I would sit there and go absolutely in hysterics and scream, and they had to pick me up and hold me. But I now you would have said, my God, you know, maybe a psychologist is a good thing for that girl, and maybe they should have gotten rid of all my 7 brothers, first of all. But that was the way it was, and of course they later threatened me if I had to go, if we played outside. They said, you go inside and ask Mama for a specific kind of cookie or some privilege. And I wouldn't want to do that. And they said, okay, if you don't do that, the doll is in the attic. We'll get the doll out. And I ran to my mother, of course, and got done what the boys wanted. So there was a growing up in lots of always noise, door slamming, voices, busy. My dad had his office, his accountant's office, in the house, which was normal then in Europe, that you had your business in your house. So that was there too, and the employees he had there were interacting with the family. There was always a lot of life, a lot of things going on, and the only times that I was really paid attention to was we had a live-in maid, and once a week a scrub woman would come, and they would work together, and I was always with them, and they would talk to me and say, here is a sponge, you can do this, you're a big girl, you can do that. And that to me was so wonderful and gave me such a kind of a purpose. I don't know how to say it, and it's not that my mother was not affectionate, because she was, and my dad at that time was very affectionate. I used to sit next to him at dinner time, and dinner time was a large table of 12 people, parents, 10 kids. At that time in Europe, a dinner always started with a soup course, then the main meal, usually, you know, potato. It's Dutch, and the Dutch eat a lot of potatoes. potatoes, vegetable, and either meat or fish, and then a dessert. And I would sit next to my dad, and after he had finished with dinner, he always put his arm around me and stroked my arm. Because as a little girl, your skin is of course nice and smooth, and you know, I was still had dimples everywhere. So for a man, that I think is a wonderful thing. And I was cute. I was blonde, uh, and I had my mouth with me. Uh, I was wide awake. So it was good. But the way I grew up, I think, was in a large family like that. You sometimes don't get enough attention because there's so many children, and my mother was still very involved in my dad's business, and with 10 children and cooking, and you know, at that time she did sew a lot, and she also once a week she had a woman who came and did all the repair sewing. um, we had a sewing machine with what do you call that? You know, with a wheel.
The
It was
treadle?
not electric. And my youngest brother Walt and I used to play with that and got our hands, you know, under the thing that you put the pedal.
Yep.
And the what is that called? The thing that goes around the wheel. And we used to play with that, and we knew we were going to get hurt, but that thing just drew us. It was so interesting. Walt was my little friend. He was the seventh boy, and we had two big staircases, and on the lower staircase we would go upstairs, put arms around each other, and then while sitting go from step to step to step until we were down, and then we would say, "Oh, I sit," and then we would run upstairs and do this game, I think, for hours. But he and I were very, very, very close. We both sucked our thumb for a long time. At 11 o'clock, when it was coffee time, we got a cup of hot chocolate, and one of us, Walt or I, then sat on my mom's lap, and whoever was not sitting there tried to push the one who was sitting there away. I still remember that, and it was warm and it was good. And we usually also had maids who were very intertwined with the family. You know, they were in the living room having coffee and hot chocolate with us and talk, and I would sit on their lap. And it was, I think, a good and warm family, but just horrendously busy and noisy. And the only time it was quiet was when we had dinner and we were served soup. We were not allowed to talk. And if you have 10 children who are not allowed to talk, and there's a nice tablecloth on the table and you can't see the feet, there is a lot of injury under the table. And in any case, that's the way I remember my early years until I was 5, 6, and I was sent to school. Walt and I were not sent to a kindergarten. They tried with Walt, and Walt was so homesick, and so my mom said, "Okay, he has a little sister. We can teach them to read write or whatever, and let them stay home and play together. So when we went to school, that was quite rather traumatic because I didn't have kindergarten, had no idea what a school was. Fortunately, I had a wonderful, gentle teacher, first grade teacher, and I did well, and so did Walt. Um, but that was a little school in our hometown, which was at that time kind of a bedroom community of The Hague. Um, and my parents thought that I would be better off sending me to a very elite boarding school in the same place where I lived, but because I lived there, I could be what they called extern, not intern. And so I had to walk every day to school, and in the school was surrounded with a big forest. And I still remember walking there, and I always thought that the storm was caused by trees that made a noise rather than the storm causing the trees to speak that loudly. And it was usually pretty frightening experience to me. And there are lots of storms in Holland because it's so flat, and we lived about 7 kilometers from the beach or from the sea, from the North Sea. And so the weather was very changeable, and you could have a beautiful day in the sunshine, and 5 minutes later you would have a storm with lots of wind and big thunderstorms, which would come inland and create havoc. And because the country is flat, the thunder is like the ripping of a sheet. I've never since then heard thunder like that again. And then the country, or the earth, the country rejects the thunderstorm, and it goes back to the ocean, to the North Sea. Then the North Sea rejects it. So sometimes you have a thunderstorm 3 or 4 times, and they are really substantial and not fun for a little girl to walk. Took me about 20 minutes to walk to school. So my school experience at the expensive school was not very. The teaching was good, and there were, of course, nuns. It was Catholic school. Some of the nuns were really good, and some were so mean and so. I was scared of them. It was just horrible. I did well in school, but I was also treated as an extern. I didn't live at the school, and they somehow made me feel that. Plus, the real bad thing was that my dad, that school was expensive, and he didn't pay his bills. And this reverberated on me. And that was horrible, and I think unfair. And if nuns talk about sin, I think they were sinful in that respect, because a child has no recourse.
Yeah.
And that's when I really started to learn a side of my dad that was in many respects traumatic. He was an accountant by profession, but he was also a reservist in the Dutch army, and he was an officer. And he was very, very proud of that. And he was I think, he should have been in the army. and that should have been his profession. He just loved it. He ate it up. He had, because he was an officer, he had a footman. He had 2 horses that he rode, and the footman washed the horses. The footman polished his boots, got his uniforms to the steamers, and so on. It was a totally old world situation. In what I have read now, it doesn't exist anymore, and the Second World War, of course, changed everything. But the nasty thing was that my dad did not pay his bills, which did not make the marriage between my dad and my mom good, because my mom dealt with the greengrocer and the baker and the man from the garage and all kinds of payments that my dad did not make. And so there was an enormous stressful relationship that reverberated on us children. And as we grew up, and later when we were married and we would come together, we would always talk about how unsuited they were. My husband, as an accountants and engineers usually don't have they may have a lot of inner life, but it doesn't show. They're rather cold and logical. And my mother was very artistic. If she had married, she would have gone to a conservatorium to become a pianist. And she played the piano a lot. Sometimes a whole afternoon we would come home from school and nothing for dinner would be done, because she had played all afternoon. And I think that was her escape, her out. And so we were all sent to the greengrocer, to the baker, whatever was needed, and she got a meal together. And so she was very good at that. But to us children, it was a very, I think, stressful growing up while your parents have a really bad marriage, because you can just feel the stress. So that's my first part of growing up. And then I think the next time we should start with the Second World War, when that started.
Okay.